It's time to get the inside info on BYU with Cougar insider Mitch Harper of KSLSports.com on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Yes, welcome back. JJ and Alex, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone, getting you ready on a Wednesday, not just for your Thursday, but also, of course, for your Friday and Saturday. You've got Utah football on Friday, a matchup against UCF, and then, of course, you've got BYU versus Houston. Another late game in Provo. Appreciate you, Big 12, for making us stay up so dang late. Mitch Harper, BYU insider, KSLSports.com. Also co-host with me on First and 12 on KSL News Radio and on the KSL Sports Zone every Sunday morning. Mitch, what's going on, man? Happy Thanksgiving week to you.
Hey, happy Thanksgiving, guys. Happy to be on. This is an exciting week. So much to get to with BYU football, BYU basketball. It's a lot of fun, so I'm excited.
Well, let's jump in right here. Let's start first with the football side of things. The Cougs, of course, the first thing is, and obviously it's moot to have to ask or talk about what the reality is of all these other teams winning or losing games before BYU gets it done against Houston. What's this Houston team present in terms of maybe a problem for BYU? Is it the fact that they actually play surprisingly decent defense, this Cougar team?
They do, and they've got some good linebackers with Michael Batten, who's one of their leading tacklers, and they can generate some havoc. And they have no problem getting into these rock fights because that's where they live. Houston's only averaging about 110 passing yards per game since Zian Chris took over as the starting quarterback, and that included a really good game, when he took over against TCU. So they can't throw the football. They don't have much offensively. They want to keep this thing maybe 16-13, and with it being a cold night and BYU's offense, being hit and miss the last month or so, maybe that could be prone to an upset. But I do wonder, too, part of this with Houston is how invested are they into this game. It's going to be cold weather. You got to imagine that's going to be something that doesn't have them too thrilled. And then they've also got an interim offensive coordinator. They're already making shakeups on the staff. They're probably looking ahead to next year. Honestly, if anything, the only motivation that I can think of for Houston is, one, pride, but two, maybe nailing down a spot on the 105-man roster for next year. Because other than that, there's just really not much on the line for Houston in this game. So I think BYU's in a really good spot with this one. There was kind of a good, vibe, I think, around practices. But, that was the case last week, though, too. They got to execute, and they got to come out strong. BYU's got to play well for a complete 60 minutes, and they have not done that in quite some time.
Yeah, it's been a while, and I know it's got to be frustrating for not just fans, but the coaches and players in that locker room who know that they can do better. I agree. If BYU's offense shows up in this game, they don't have anything to worry about, but that offense has been missing. I shared this stat during the game on Saturday that from the fourth quarter of the UCF game until halftime of the Arizona State game, BYU's offense only scored 2 touchdowns on offensive drives in 29 drives. That's insane, Mitch. Where did the offense go, number one? And two, was it just simply execution? And two, did they find something in the second half against Arizona State that could spark them again?
I think they did find something with ASU, even though Arizona State's secondary was kind of the weakness of that defense. And you kind of wonder, is it just a byproduct of that? Was ASU kind of, foot off the gas a little bit after they got that response touchdown, that quick strike to make it 28-9? But I do think they found something there. Part of me, though, just you felt like BYU, were they a little bit figured out because there's how much depth is in this playbook that Aaron Roderick is throwing at Jake Retzloff. And look, Retzloff knows the offense inside and out, but have they kind of maxed out on what they know on that playbook, what he's mastered? Because it just felt like for a long stretch there, those defenses they were facing with UCF to a lesser degree, Utah, Kansas, and Arizona State, they just couldn't figure anything out. And I feel like physicality in the trenches, too, for BYU, that was shocking in the first half. That BYU just no-showed. With everything on the line, maybe one of the – I'd say probably it's tough to get into, but like up there with top 3 biggest game in the Kalani era right there with Coastal.
Yeah.
And probably bigger because – it's Big 12, and it's a conference, and there's so much more, and you just no-showed for 30 minutes to where I'm in the halftime, press box thinking this is one of those performances where it just kind of negates and makes you question how good was BYU really. But, they obviously had that strong second half and kind of, maybe if you want to say a moral victory, I guess. But I thought that was discouraging, the lack of physicality they had. I thought the offensive line has struggled in recent weeks. Now it has been, a bit retooled with some of the injuries they've had. And Austin Leausa, he's going to be someone to monitor this week, but he left the game last week on crutches at ASU. So last week they had Sonny Mocassini and Bruce Mitchell interchanging. They've got to tighten things up on the offensive line there because outside of Waylon Lapuaho, it's been kind of a struggle the last few weeks. And ever since Braden Kine went down with about 6 minutes to go against Utah, they're trying to find themselves, it feels like, again. So that's got to get right on the offensive line, and that should lend itself to BYU having some more success. They can keep Jake upright, give him a clean pocket, and he can throw and get the ball to his playmakers with Darius Lasser and Chase Roberts.
Mitch, one of the things that's also been interesting with all that is the development of, development. It's just, I think part of the offense struggling a little bit is that Jake Retzlaff hasn't been super sharp either. And we've seen good Jake and bad Jake all season long. And bad Jake, of course, delivered some and almost a comeback against Kansas. But then bad Jake also delivered a bad pick in that game. And then, of course, the game locked out last week, or at least that last drive stalled out with that interception on that slant. So what is Jake Retzlaff? Where's he at right now? Because there was a lot of what's going to happen here? Is his confidence going to come back? And after that Kansas game, he had moments, but that first half and really the first two drives, I think when they went for it on 4th and 5, and the collective BYU fan base was like, what on earth is going on here? And then they didn't get it, and then ASU goes right down and marches. But the offense wasn't just sputtering. It was also Jake who was struggling a little bit.
Yeah, and I think also that last play of the game where he doesn't get it to the end zone. Where was that arm strength from Southern Illinois and the Baylor games? Where was that? And I think you attribute a lot of that to getting banged up. The Oklahoma State game, he took some hard hits. The Utah game, the Kansas game. Most of it non-throwing side and hand and things like that, but he's banged up, and like many guys are this time of the year, and I thought that was a bit surprising that he couldn't get that to the end zone. Now he was under a little bit of pressure, but he's got to be more accurate, and it's going to be really interesting to see how BYU treats Retzlaff in 2025. Is he just the foregone guy? And I think that's why it's critical to finish this season strong. To get a win over Houston, get a win in a bowl game. Just, again, like he's going to have a decisive edge over the rest of the QBs, right, that they currently have, because I'm already kind of building out my 2025 boards here for next year. And you look at that quarterback room, it's just him. That's it. McKay Hillstead, too, and then probably Bourget, and then Noah Lugo as a developmental guy. Do they consider a portal guy, and I just feel like it's critical for Jake to get back to that player that thrived against Baylor, and they came out strong statement early on in that game. They were high-flying offense. That's what they've got to be to close out this season. If you're Jake, you don't want to give the coaching staff any sort of second guessing, because it could be a case of, has he reached his ceiling? Is this who he is what it's going to be? Because you hope that he takes another big leap like he did from last year to this year. If he does that again, maybe he could be an all-conference guy. I just think it's critical for Jake to finish this year strong because he has had a really good year. But you don't want to let it end on a sour note, because the last few weeks have left a lot to be desired, and he's got to get back on track. And I thought that last week was a positive sign in that direction, and now it's just got to carry over here starting with Houston this week.
What were your reaction to the college football playoff rankings, and specifically when it comes to the Big 12? Feels like the committee is undervaluing the Big 12 and what those teams have accomplished this year.
I agree that they're undervalued, and it feels like that they're almost punishing these teams for not having lofty expectations coming into the year, because all these teams were the ones that were near the bottom in the projections in the Big 12 media polls and projections for this season. And because they started so far behind everyone else, they are not getting a benefit of the doubt. Whereas a team like Kansas State, who isn't as good as people expected, yet they had that preseason expectations. They're still finding their way at the bottom end of the top 25 despite having 3 losses. It's really discouraging, I think, for BYU fans to finally get into this power conference environment, and you're finding yourself stacked behind Tulane. And BYU's 9-2, and they've had a really good season, and they've had some strong wins, and you're behind a group of 5 team, which seemed unthinkable because BYU experienced that 3 years ago when they were one of the last teams out for the at-large pool for New Year's 6 games. Instantly at the final week of the season, the Power 5 teams just catapulted right in front of BYU, and maybe that will be the case. I know a lot of people believe that, but I feel like this committee has had some tendencies week after week where they're not impressed with these Big 12 teams, even if you play top 25 on top 25. Like that ASU BYU game was as big as this league can provide, maybe outside of the championship game this season. And what did it really do for ASU? It got them a 5-spot jump and barely in front of Tulane. Like it's just that was kind of telling to me. And I think it's a difficult situation for the Big 12. They've just got to find a way to make sure that their conference champ gets in, because that would just be a really bad look if somehow Tulane finished higher than the Big 12 champ and you get completely shut out.
Wow.
And I think that's the fear for the Big 12, is that you run the risk with Tulane hovering with ASU, you run the risk of your champ not going to the playoff, and that would just be catastrophic of epic proportions if that happened.
BYU and Houston, that one's, of course, going to be another late game in Provo, and Houston, of course, has a history with BYU. I think the last time they came to Provo was in 2014. And but now as conference opponents and in the Big 12, lots on the line for BYU, and certainly Houston would love to play spoiler. Let's kick things over to the basketball side of things. My heavens. Last year we were talking about how exciting it was going to this season, but, temper your expectations, blah, blah, blah. All that expectation, sandbagging is out the friggin' window for BYU basketball now. They're going on the road tomorrow, and they're taking on an Ole Miss team who's already in the top 25, and BYU is on the cusp of breaking into the top 25. What's their shot against this Ole Miss Rebs team coming out of the ACC, and they're playing together in San Diego tomorrow?
I think they got a really good shot against Ole Miss. Like, similar to BYU, both teams haven't played anyone. They've both played 2 of the worst non-conference schedules to this point of the season, so it's a real barometer for both. But I love BYU's playmaking ability on the guard line with Demon and then having Dallin Hall back. And it's going to be really interesting to see what BYU can do with that guard line and those two as they continue to get playing time together. I thought it was interesting today, too, in a Zoom call with Kevin Young getting ready for this matchup. He, I asked him about the defensive side because he's, continued to harp on that. He knows that that's going to be an area where they've got to get better because he's confident in his group that they can score. They've got scores. They got guys that can get buckets. Cannon Catching's the freshman, number 6. He's just one of those rare talents that I've never really seen at BYU where he can create his own shot and just elevate above anyone that's defending him. So offense is not the issue for BYU. It's going to be on the defensive side. And Young pointed out that he's really excited to kind of unlock some schemes. I think you're going to see kind of that NBA tactician, that scheming kind of come to light in this game. Because you really, to this point, you've just seen blowouts and BYU's just coasted. They've just had the better talent. You haven't had to really see Kevin Young devise some scheme or late-game execution, inbounds plays, things like that to create opportunities for his team. And I'm really kind of curious to see that side of it going into this MTE where you've got Ole Miss and then potentially, national runner-up, defending runner-up, Purdue, who's a nationally ranked, or NC State, who played in the Final Four. So this is a great chance for BYU to really validate that all the preseason hype that fans felt this team deserved is real, because this would be a great springboard for BYU to get into the national conversation. They would be a top 25 team. So it's a good test, and I think it's a really good matchup with Ole Miss. Ole Miss has got about 4 1,000 career scores in their starting 5. They've hit the portal hard, that Ole Miss team has. So I'm really intrigued to see how this matchup plays out.
Before we cut you loose, Mitch, I had one more football question. It's going to be a wild weekend for the Big 12 as we watch all these scenarios play out. How do you think it's going to play out? What do you think is going to be the final result? Who's going to be in that Big 12 championship game?
I think it's going to be a rematch, Arizona State and BYU in the Big 12 championship. I think Kansas State's going to go into Ames and beat Iowa State, and I think Cougar fans get the matchup they want, BYU and ASU, and even coaches and players from BYU are publicly making it clear they want that matchup, even Jay Hill this week and players. So I think that's going to happen. And man, if that does, that would be a pro-BYU crowd in Texas and revenge opportunity. I think it's going to happen. And Kansas State, they had a change with their offensive coordinator. He moved from the box to field level, and they're painting that as the key to why their offense kind of hit its stride finally last week. Their offensive line looked like the K-State O-lines of the past. They played really well against Cincinnati. So maybe that's the difference for them. What's going to be a tough game against Iowa State, but I think they get it done. And Iowa State in these spots where they got the chance to get their first ever 10-win season. Can they break through? It's pressure spot. Whenever they get the spotlight on them, they seem to fold, kind of like the UCF game where they had a close call earlier this year when they were in the top 10, and then they had that upset loss to Kansas. So I think K-State gets it done, and we see BYU and ASU in Arlington 1 week from this week, and then late Saturday night I'll have to book any sort of travel. So it'll be fun.
Don't tease fans like that, Mitch. How dare you? Get people pumped
I'm feeling
for
good
the idea
about
of
it,
a
guys.
rematch.
I'm feeling confident.
You know what?
Book that flight. How confident are you, Mitch? Book that flight now.
I know.
Do it now.
I'm doing it right now while we're on the air. Come on, show your real stuff.
Break out the P card on company dime.
PK already booked his flight.
Ooh.
PK's the confident one. He already booked his flight.
Because he wants to go watch the Sun Devils.
Well,
it's a work trip.
There's the real answer. There's the real answer. Mitch, of course, is going to be right back at work the rest of these next few days. Tomorrow, when Grandma's stuffing gets out of the oven, Mitch is going to be covering that BYU basketball game between the Ole Miss Rebs and BYU. That starts at 3:30 tomorrow. All the bylines that are BYU related over the next however long you want to follow BYU. Mitch Harper's going to have them for KSLSports.com. Mitch, thanks for your help, man. We appreciate it.
You bet, guys. Take care.
There you go. Mitch Harper.